as I'm sure everybody who has consumed this today has been doing as well, about my kids who happen to be about the same ages as the two who were killed, about sending them off to school this morning. I've been thinking about their friends and their teachers, about all the parents, about all the grandparents out there navigating the return to school. And all they should be hoping to do is have someone to sit with at lunch or someone to play with on the playground. And they should be waiting to hear an update when they get home. And that is not what these parents at this school experience today. Sorry, this is a tough one. Having your child killed while they are sitting in a pew for a morning prayer service is not what any parent should have to worry about. And I have felt a mixture of anger and a lot of anger and emotional exhaustion about this today, as I'm sure many of you have, because we have been here so many times. And yet again, like clockwork, half of the politicians in our country have little more to offer than thoughts and prayers. That is all they are offering. Join all of us in praying for the victims, was Vice President J.D. Vance's response today. That's what he said. That's it. Please join me in praying for everyone involved, Trump wrote. We have seen this play out over and over again. There is a shooting, then come the thoughts and prayers, and then comes the attempt to shift the focus. This is what always happens. You're going to start seeing narratives. You're already seeing them. They're already out there about how the shooter was trans. You're going to see narratives about how the shooter appeared to be anti-Trump and anti-Semitic, and clearly was in the midst of a mental health crisis. There's no question about that. But here's the thing. There are trans people all over the world. There are anti-Semitic people, unfortunately, all over the world. And people filled with plenty of political hate all over the world. And mental health issues are not unique to the United States. And yes, we should do more to address them. But it's also an issue all over the world. But this is the only country where shootings like this one happen this often. The United States not only has the highest rate of gun violence of any country in the world, it's become a leading cause of death for young people and teenagers in this country. That should make everybody angry. Weaponizing the shooter's identity is meant to distract from what matters. That is what they are doing, trying to distract from what matters. Here's what matters. Today's shooter bought the rifle, handgun, and shotgun they used to do what they did today legally. We live in a country with more guns than people, where there are not universal background checks, there are not bans on assault weapons, and it is far too easy to buy a gun. It's the guns, everyone. It's not really a secret.
Now, this clip is obviously reporting on the horrific shooting that happened earlier this week, where a transgender person went into a Catholic church and killed 2 people and injured many more people. And when we are thinking about how to respond to this kind of thing, the things we're seeing in our country, one of the things that we have to recognize is that when we hear about these kinds of tragedies from the media, we do not just get the facts of what happened. We also get an interpretation of those facts. That is to say, we are not just told what happened, we're even told how we ought to think about them. And even the interpretation of the events themselves are often couched in moral language. The idea is you should think about this particular incident this way. And as we think about the interpretations that are out there, it's important for us as Christians to think through what is being said by the media and how it relates to the event itself. And I would say, without question, the main thing that we are to take from this as Christians is to recognize that the event itself is the work of the devil, but also the mainstream interpretation that we are getting of the event is also the work of the devil. Now, one of the things that's clear from the clip that was just played from Jen Psaki is that the shooter's identity as transgender was clearly being downplayed. It is said, not to be an important factor in all of these things that are happening. Now, others will either ignore it. News articles will ignore it, and then some will warn us that we are not to draw particular conclusions about the identity of the person. That the fact that the person was transgender and believed in this ideology is said to be irrelevant. We are not to draw conclusions with regard to this sort of thing. And again, this kind of interpretation of the event is couched in moral language. That is to say, it is the right and just thing to do, is the way it's being presented to us, for us not to draw conclusions about the fact that the person was transgender who committed this shooting. However, this is completely false. Now, apart from the fact that we saw just a couple of years ago another mass murder that was committed by a transgender person, and particularly against Christians as well, the attempt by a transgender person to attack Christians is now not something that is new. But even apart from the pattern itself, it is simply true that transgenderism is a great sin that opens the door for many other kinds of sins. In fact, we could even say transgenderism is a deception of the devil himself. Now, this is highly relevant for this particular situation, because the shooter, before he committed all these attacks, had pictures, drawings of himself speaking with the devil or with a demon. They appear to be seeing in a mirror. There clearly was a connection with satanic and demonic activity with regard to this person. That is to say, this shooter was clearly much closer to Satan than he was to God. And this would prompt us to ask a question: is there actually, not just in this case, but a general connection between transgenderism and the work and deception of Satan? And the answer to that question, which we're told we're not supposed to ask, we're clearly kept way far away from that question. The answer to that question, though, is clearly yes. What is the nature of the connection? Well, just consider what transgenderism is. It is the idea that a person is able to choose and govern the reality of their own identity and being, that they get to choose reality for themselves, and even they're able to foist that reality upon other people. That is to say, the ideology of transgenderism inherently includes in it an implicit claim to be God. It, rather than submit to the nature of reality as God has made it, a person claims to be able to set reality for themselves. That is to say, it is a claim to be God, and as such, that it is in fact a great sin. Very often there is this idea on the right that we are to, it would be better for us to categorize transgenderism as a mental illness, but it's not really an illness in the sense of like getting the flu or getting a cold. It is actually a great sin that is a rebellion directly against God himself, that is being done through the deception of Satan. And even in this sense, if we think about the deception of Satan element, it is the kind of deception is actually parallel and very much built on the foundation of the deception of Eve that we see in the garden. Remember what was said to Eve in the garden: in the day in which you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will be like God. You will be like God. That is the offer. You will get to be like God. Now, of course, Eve cannot be like God. Adam cannot be like God. But that was the deception of Satan. And this is exactly what is happening with transgenderism. The idea is, if you eat of this tree, or if you believe in this deception, you will get to determine reality for yourself as if you were God. And it is no wonder then that someone who gives into that deception will come under the power and the influence of the devil, just as our first parents did when they sinned through the deception of the devil himself. So it is highly relevant then that this person was transgender. And the thing that we are to connect as Christians is that this idea of transgenderism, it is related to the devil. When we see works that we can clearly identify as the works of the devil, we can see that transgenderism is a step along the way to this kind of action. Now, what I'm saying is that the connection between the shooter's identity as transgender and this particular event is instructive for us. But I'm also saying that the media narrative to downplay this connection is also the work of the devil. It's part of the deception of the devil, not just that the event would be in some sense caused through the instrumentality of the devil in terms of deception, but also that the predominant interpretation of the event itself would hide the fact that the devil was involved in it. This is also the work of the devil. Now, you'll notice another thing that was said in this clip in terms of the interpretation of the event, which I would say again is also going to be the work of the devil in terms of the interpretation, is the downplay of the significance of prayer. There was even a kind of outrage against those who are praying for the victims of the family. Now, this clearly follows from the point that was just made. If it is the case that this event happened through the deception of the devil, and that the devil himself is involved in the interpretation of the event at the largest scale of the country, it would clearly also be a part of that message that you would want to downplay the significance of prayer. If the problem that we are facing is the work of the devil, then the solution that we have for this is the act of God, who is stronger than the devil. The only one who is stronger than the devil in terms of, if you compare our own strength to the devil, we'd say that the devil is stronger than us. But God is the one that we appeal to, the one who rules and defends us. Christ is the one who has crushed the head of the serpent. We ought therefore to appeal to God to defeat the works of the devil. If Satan really is controlling the interpretation of the events as they are being kind of mass produced, it would make sense that there would be a downplaying of the significance of prayer. And this is actually something that we see as a general way in which the devil works. The devil will not only cause the deception that leads to the sin that is horrific, but also then seeks to control the narrative around the interpretation of the sin in order to promote even more sin. This works with, for instance, feminism, which is also an ideology of the devil. How many young women fall into feminism because they are mistreated by a man and say, the thing that I need to do is to get rid of all sort of authority that a man might have, and so then they will not submit to their fathers, they will not submit to their husbands, and they will say that really what women need is to be free from men. Now, what is happening here? Very often, with regard to whatever abusive situation has occurred, there will be the work of the devil that is there working in the heart of the man who's committing this act against the woman. But then there is also the whispering in the ear of the woman that the problem is not the devil and not even necessarily the man himself, but men as a whole, and the good order that God has established for the relationship between men and women, whereby God has provided for husbands and fathers to protect and care for their wives and daughters. This is the kind of added step of the devil. It's not just the act itself, but it's the interpretation of the act, of the sin, whereby the devil whispers in the ear that really what you need to do is abandon those good things that God has made and those good things that God has said. And that is what is clearly happening here as well. Now, you'll notice the last thing in this clip from Jen Psaki is that once again we have very common in the media narrative when anything like this happens, the focus on guns, not the person who is firing the gun, but guns themselves. Now, it is just a fact in history, particularly recent history, that the attempt to control the circulation of weapons among a civilian population correlates with a tyrannical government. Now, it may seem like I'm making a political point when I'm making this, that the idea is that the gun control thing is not good, but it is actually a spiritual point. Why? Because tyrannical governments are governments that persecute Christians. Tyrannical governments are the kind of thing that is spoken of in Revelation when Revelation speaks of the beast, who is the agent of the devil in persecuting Christians. The beast is manifested in this world in the persecuting governments. This is what we see in Daniel chapter 7 as well, where you have all of the beasts that are described. They refer to different empires that persecute the people of God. Satan is always trying to get the government to move towards being a beast that will persecute Christians. And it is simply true that those kinds of governments in today's world are also those who take the guns away from people. They will use these kinds of tragedies in order to take the rights from people that they have to defend themselves so that they are more easily controlled. This also is a part of the work of the devil. And so in light of this, brothers and sisters, my exhortation to you is this, is to remember what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, where he speaks of us not being ignorant of the schemes of the devil. We are not to be ignorant of what he is doing in this world. We ought to recognize the works of the devil. We ought to expose them. And then we ought to pray. The thing that is being disdained is the thing that we must commit to doing ourselves. And not just praying for the families of the victims and their comfort, but also praying for the destruction of the work of the devil through the outpouring of the Spirit of God, that God would bless the preaching of his word to this end, that the devil might be overcome, that the one who crushed the head of the serpent might see his kingdom be advanced in this world. That is what we must be praying for, brothers and sisters, above everything else. let's commit ourselves not just to saying that we will pray, but actually praying for this. That is, praying for the advancement of God's glory in this world.